So here we go. Basically, what we're going to do is I'm going to go through this. I don't know how much experience all of you have with Fantasy Grounds Unity and how much interactions you've done in the program itself already. So I'm going to take you through all of the basics in the beginning. And we're going to be completely, primarily focusing on the image side of things. That's my primary job at SmiteWorks is I am the resident artist, and therefore I create all of the different uh, artistic elements that you might find, as well as certain map packs and whatnot that we sell through the Fantasy Grounds store. But basically, all of our functionality comes down to this one little button right down here, and it's called Assets. And this is where all of those images are going to be stored, from our tokens all the way through everything else that might come in a module or anything that we actually put in. We can actually this is our window into using all of those assets. Our other favorite little button is going to be over here, and this is going to be our images and maps. This is where our workspace. This is where we're going to be creating all of the different elements that we're going to be using in our campaigns, and from our maps to our handouts and any other visually related object that we might share with our players or even use ourselves. And what we're going to be doing is I'm going to be showing you the first two steps that we can use to create our new elements inside of here. I'm just going to turn off a light here real quick. It's pretty warm here today. I hope everyone's doing well and enjoying GenCon and enjoying the nice summer weather. It's pretty hot where I live, so and I live up north, so it's a little bit uncomfortable for me. Basically, what we're going to be doing is jumping in here. All we have to do is right click into our window space, and we can come right down here and we can create a new item. This item is blank. It has no information in it. We can drag this out. We have a nice little workspace in here, which we can do all of our creating. And we're just going to name this test for right now so that we have some sort of reference for which we go by. I'm going to go through some basic functionality of the window and all of the different things that are going on inside of the our image tools here. The first thing that you're going to notice is over here on the right hand side we have a nice little tool set. It's divided up among these tabs at the top here. This is our normal play setting, and this is where you would want to be if you're going to be doing actual gameplay. So once your image is created and you've shared it with your players, you're going to switch over into your play mode, and you have all of the normal tools that you might be wanting to use here, from token selection, or you can even draw onto the canvas if you so wish, and we can also come in and erase that as well. A lot of the tools functionality you're going to see cross over from one set to the next, which is a really good thing. Once you learn it in one particular area, you'll be able to jump over into another area and be quite comfortable there. We also have some another little window down here, which will change as you see as we progress through all of these different elements. In here we have a nice zoom extents here, which what will happen is if we make a creation, let's say it's like this, we can zoom right in on it, and we don't have to worry too much about manually scaling it in and out with our mouse wheel. We also have our show hide shortcuts. So any sort of shortcut that you created, I don't know if you guys have watched some of Doug's fine campaign management seminars that he's been doing for Fantasy Grounds and GenCon. But if you haven't, check it out tomorrow. I believe he's going to be streaming it again tomorrow. And what this allows us to do is any sort of story element that we add, we'll create a nice little pin. Let me just get over to my default play here. If we don't want to see those, we can just hide that very easily. We also have a right-clicking ability on anything that we do inside here, and we can just delete that as well. This is our little button that enables and disables our line of sight features. And we're going to be getting into this a little bit more later on, but we'll be leaving it off for now until we have actually some line of sight to be dealing with here. Over here, this large area is where all of the layers that we create are going to be stacked up here. I don't know if anyone has ever used Photoshop or GIMP or anything like that, but we always have that little panel on the side, and that's where all of those images are stored in layers. These are all of our layer functions at the bottom here, and we can push a button and create new layers for painting, line of sight, effects. We can even create folders that we can now group together all of our different elements. Once we group them together, it's great for organization and all of those sorts of things. Excuse me, I have to clear my throat real quick. Pardon me. We also have a duplicate layer button, which if we have created something, we can create it very easily again. This is great for when we do complex images that we need to reproduce over and over again. And then we can group them together in our folders and allow us to, in one single button, create large groups of images all at the same time. This is still in beta, and so when this does come out, this will all be repopulated inside of the folder. But for right now, I'll be using this delete button just to get rid of all of that stuff. Jumping over to the next tab, we have our Layers tab. And this is where we work with most of our tiles, and all of the tiles tools are located. It's also a great area to manipulate some of the layers and add a whole bunch of different elements to our images. We can come in after the fact and change certain elements. Let me just really quickly jump in here, and I'll get into some tiles here. For this demonstration, I'm going to be primarily using the FG Art Pack 2019. It came out a little while ago, and we'll be creating a forest scene and doing all kinds of nice stuff, all inside of Fantasy Grounds Unity today. And what we can do with these is we can easily populate an area with tiles very, very quickly. And we can either drop one right in here, and this is going to be our default tile. You can see that it automatically generates the image here. Let me just back out so that we can kind of see here. Every click that I do, wherever I click, will immediately generate a new tile. And this is great for when you're trying to build up areas very quickly. Let me just delete that. Once we have a tile set in our little tile tool here, and the width and height is all set, and it will always reference this. So for example, if I were to change this size to 10 by 10, let me just remove this tile that's in there immediately and put this one back in. Fantasy Grounds is smart enough to remember this, and so any other tile that I grab will immediately be put to the exact size that I have set that original tile set as. Therefore, we can set whatever dimensions that we wish for our creations, and it will remember that, and we can just easily now just drag and drop all of these different elements, and it will maintain that. Let me just delete out of those really quickly. Another note that we can have here is that after the fact, if we switch over to our layer selection tool, we can change the colors of anything that we create on the fly here. And I would like to stress this as well. Anything that we do will happen real time to our players. So we are able to create maps on the fly while players are actually viewing the work being done. We can even adjust our creations after the fact. So therefore, we could add layers for night or anything else. And that will happen automatically as our players view it, which is an amazing tool in itself. We also have total control over our alpha channel, so we can change the opacity of things, and we're going to be using that a lot today. I see that there's a question in chat. It says, when you have a tile selected, as you do, does clicking on the color picker add a tint, allowing choosing a different tile, or do nothing? It does. And so what we can do actually, let me just cancel out of this, and I'll go back to my tile tool here. I can change the default of this particular tile. Let's say I'm going to drop this down so it's very apparent. And now every time that I click my button down, it will automatically populate my workspace with the tile in accordance to what I have set it at. So you really have total control over everything that you engage with inside of all of these tools. Now what we can do is also we can, let me grab one of these other tiles that will show, and you can see that this remembers it. So once we've set this, anything that we drag in is going to repopulate to the exact same dynamics that we have already put into the system. Let me delete these really quickly, and we can either just hit this button to reset it, or we can come in here and do it manually. Once we put a tile in here, you can see that this has been reset. As I reset it, it's gone back to its original size. And I can now rotate the image in this plane, but if I want to actually do it on this one, I have to have my layer selection, and then this can be rotated freely. It can be flipped horizontally and vertically. I can also push in any sort of angle that I wish. If I unlock the rotation lock, I can now come in here and I can put in anything I want to, 23.5 degrees, for example. So you want to know how to get a the question is, how do you have a blank window? The only way that you can create a blank window is if you go into your workspace over here in the image and map window, you right click and you create a new item, and this will create an entirely blank workspace for you. And now I'm just going to delete that one, just so we don't have too much of a complex area here. Here's a really great thing about this. These rotations are always going to be going 90 degrees. And so if I have set this default to 23.5, I can still rotate it. And what it will do is it'll add 90 degrees to every time I do that rotation. So that if we have a particular angle that we want to have our map at, we still are able to use the rest of the tools and it will work effectively. So everything works exactly as you would expect it to. It makes handling large areas extremely easy. Deleting that out, we can go through here. We also have a grid relative snap. This button, if we turn it off, it will no longer stick to the grid that we have set. And so therefore, we're able to place it wherever we wish. This can also be achieved by holding down the control button, and then you can move it around and also have no sticking to any sort of grid whatsoever. Yep, you just right click into the area, and then it has to be inside the images and map space. So you want to come over here to your images and map button. Make sure that you have the window open. Right click inside of the window in any sort of spot that's not populated. If I were to right click over this particular image, I can still do a create a new yep, you got it. And now let me just delete this. And coming back to my workspace, we're going to be moving along through all of these different elements. We can set the visibility of anything that we have. And one thing that you should be noted here is that if you were to create a folder and anything that we place in it, let me just throw out a couple of different elements here. I'm going to go back into my tile here. I'm going to keep these at 10 by 10 for the moment. And I'm going to put together a couple of different images here, and you can see that these all snap quite seamlessly together. Make sure that I'm in the correct area here. As long as the colors line up, then everything will be seamless with this particular tile set. Once I have a couple of these images all set in stone here, and I begin to populate my folder with them. I have to drop this onto the folder itself. Now the folder, everything that is inside that folder, we're able to use as a unit at this time. And once you have all of your particular images inside of here, I can now rotate these freely because I am using this all together. I can move this all around as a unit. There's a little bit of a bug with the rotation, but this is all sorted out and allows for a very easy manipulation of multiple of images all at the same time. I'm just going to delete that folder and we're going to move on here. Anyone else have any sort of questions about the tile-oriented aspects here? One more small little note as I drag this in here. You'll notice that each layer has a visibility aspect to it. And this visibility aspect shows that this is seen by both the GM and the player. Once I click on this and it's just the eye, it means that only the GM can see it. So we can create all of our little notes and images and symbols on all of our maps that we might want to have. So no longer will you need to have a GM map as well as a player map, because we can have specific layers that are dedicated to the GM only. And if I turn it completely off, then no one can see it. And this is great for hidden items that I might want to drag in layer. A lot of times what I'll do is I will create multi-level dungeons or even other environments. In one of my streams previously, I created a forest area and also an underground cavernous area. And we divided them up into folders so that we could easily manage between the two. So I don't have to change maps to go from one to the next. Further on, there is another layer in here that's for line of sight and also locking the layer. So while in the layers tab, if I hit the L button, it will, the L key, it will lock this layer and I can no longer interact with it. So we can set up our background, lock it, and we never have to worry about accidentally clicking on it or doing that. We can do the same thing if we have lots of different tiles inside of a folder. We can lock the entire folder and it will subsequently lock every layer that's inside the folder as well. It gives us a really great way of controlling our environment and taking a lot of the frustration out of things. I'm going to turn on my ratio, my rotation aspect lock, and we can delete this layer. Oh, I got to unlock it first. And move on to our painting tools. Once we get into our painting tools, this is where I spend most of my time. Well, that's a good question. The question is, I got my Unity Ultimate license. Do these tiles come with the upgrade or do I need to acquire these tiles? This particular art set is on our store itself. I can grab a link for you guys and put it into chat. If you were a backer on the Kickstarter for Fantasy Grounds Unity, I believe that this tile set, this entire art package, was given away for free to all of those backers. But yes, Kickstarter folks did get them, and there is, but there's a lot of art coming, and there's a lot of talk about how we're going to be handling a lot of the art that's going to be coming up, because there's just yeah. Well, then there you go. You'll be able to get this art package then. So once we have get into our painting tools here, I'm just going to go over a brief explanation here, and I'm just going to move back up in here and grab one of my brushes for the demonstration. I'll actually be grabbing this stone wall brush so that I can just show you how some of these tools work and their functionality before we actually get into anything that's a little bit further here. All of these tools work exactly the same way as we did with the tiles. But in conjunction with the painting tools, they're going to be a little bit different on how that we're going to be using them. Again, we can adjust this image as much as we like with all of the different colors. Oh, excuse me. All of the different colors, our alpha channels, and so on. But when we paint into our canvas here, I'm just going to change the size here till it's a little bit more appropriate so that we can see it. And as I begin to paint this out, you can see with my line tool selected, the program itself actually calculates around and does all of the bends and turns for me. So it allows me to use one particular image to make a very vast array of different images, and allows me to begin to actually create what I want to create without having to worry about the actual implications of trying to manage all kinds of different shapes and sizes of particular images. Once upon a time, if we were to do this, you would have to have all of these angled pieces that would go around corners and create your own corners and so on. But no longer in Fantasy Grounds Unity, it will handle a lot of that all for you. In the same fashion, we can use our rectangle tool and build out particular elements very, very fast. We can actually create buildings and whatnot in the same exact way. And so layering many of these on top of each other, you can get complex creations very, very quickly. We can even do the same thing with our ellipse tool, and you can see again, it calculates all of this all around, and it works exceptionally well. Each one of these can be also changed with the color picker. Currently, we cannot change a painted layer after the fact, but that will be coming before release. We'll be able to come back in and adjust all of this after the fact, but currently we have to do it ahead of time. So if I wanted to make this a nice purple circle, I have to do it now, but coming soon. That'll be that's in the works ahead. Control Z also works in here. If I were to be drawing a line out and I decided I didn't want to do that, Control Z will take care of that. So I can go back in steps as well. So if I'm drawing my line out and around and I double click to end it, I can go Control Z and it will take back each increment as I created it, which is a very handy tool as well. We also have our stamp tool. And the way that this works is much like you'd expect. If I click onto the canvas, it will certainly place the image wherever I happen to be clicking. I can rotate the image and do all sorts of interesting things. You'll notice that this is all happening on one particular layer, which is excellent for when we're trying to create lots of different image. Like if we were doing an entire layer of foliage, for example, or trees, we can divide that up into particular layers. I have a question here. If you were to set a grid, can you make snap points to match the grid? I'm going to be getting into that, Sir Joust. And so we'll be going to be going all through all of the different grid functionality and how it all works. Right now, we're just going over a little quick preview of all of the different functionality and what we have here. Got another question here. Can the tools be constrained to equal proportions? Perfect circle or square? They certainly can. Dan Goodchild, all we have to do is when we're creating a circle, I switch back over here. If I hold down Shift, just like in many other programs, it makes a perfect circle. Just like if I do on my rectangle, it will maintain a perfect square. And if I create a new layer, let me just reset my color here. And I move over here. You'll also notice that we have a massive amount of workspace. I can zoom all the way out here so that we have just a huge amount of availability of space that we can do inside our program here. I'm going to make this a little bit larger. And I've made this new layer, make sure that I have it selected. Now with my circle, I'm going to draw out a circle. And let's say I wanted to make this circle a particular size. I can go back into my layers panel. It tells me exactly what size I've created the circle. If I wanted it, I can turn off the aspect locked ratio. And if I wanted it to be 20 by 20, for example, I simply need to punch in all of the calculations here, the actual size, and it will do it for me. So you can not only handle a lot of that functionality on your own by just dragging out a circle, but you can even come in after the fact and make sure that it's fixed to whatever dimensions you wish. And then I can even come in after the fact, and let's say I've decided that I wanted to have a door here. I can just erase part of that circle away and then begin to put in my doors and whatnot. So you can really see how much time saving that you can have involved in all of this. It's really quite phenomenal. Going back into some of these other tools here, like for the stamp, for example, we can do all of these rotations. It should be noted that whenever we use the line tool, the rectangle, or the circle tool here, the ellipse tool, all of our images should be on this vertical orientation. If I turn it so that it's this way, when I draw out a line, it's going to make a series of them, which is great. And that can be used in a whole lot of different ways. It's great for making staircases and doing all sorts of things like that. But if we want it to work in the way that we anticipate it, we have to make sure that it's in that vertical orientation. I got another question over here. Let me just hop over. Has Unity optimized loading large images? Whenever I load a large image in Classic, there's a significant loading time. Yes, Unity handles much larger images, and as we get into painting out these images, here's one of the great things about how this is set up. So I've painted all of these images with this one single image. Let me just zoom in and so you can see it. I have this one single image. According to the program and how it works, I still am only using this one image. All of this is compiled out of using this one image. So if I were to share this with my players, only this single image gets sent to all of my players. Their Fantasy Grounds Unity then recompiles it in the exact same way that I have transposed it onto the screen. Therefore, we don't have any sort of significant load times. I could paint an entire forest with maybe 5 trees, and that's only going to send those particular 5 trees to all of my players, and thus is going to greatly improve the performance of the entire system. I have another question here. I'm just going to read it in my head while I take a sip of my beverage real quickly. Great. Okay, so the question is, can you draw a path, then add a brush to follow that path to draw, for example, a winding staircase? You cannot draw a path and then follow that path. Not currently, but I can show you some tricks on how you can do certain things and create some interesting kind of interactions between the user interface and the actual program itself. Yes, for performance, inside FGU will actually work much better. That's absolutely correct. You can make much larger maps by using a conglomerate of a small set of images. Map packs in this instance are going to be a huge advantage. But you can certainly bring in other maps. I'm going to be showing you guys how you can bring in a map and then enhance it with the tools inside of Unity as well. Does the functionality exist in FG Classic or only in Unity? It is only in Unity. This is a Unity-only set of tools. I'm just going to delete these real quick, and we can get moving on to some other areas here. And so you can see that we have a vast amount of functionality just in the two first areas here. The next is our Effects tab, and inside our Effects tab is where we'll be using all of the different effects. And just to demonstrate here, I'm going to grab one of these early maps. Why don't we grab this Witches layer here? And so here is a map that was actually created with some of the swamp assets that you can find actually inside of, it's actually these assets here, which come in FG Art Pack 2019. And so here's a map that was created with these assets. And if we were going to be, let's just move back over to our workspace here. One of the great things that we have in here is actual effects layers that we can use. Now we can create a new effects layer by just clicking this little button down here. Once we have it selected, we're able to add all kinds of nifty little events in here. So if we wanted to make it look like it's raining, we can certainly do that. We can add all kinds of different elements, snow and so on. So we can actually greatly enhance our images even beyond what we can do with the actual assets that we either include ourselves or purchase through the store or whatever. And so there's a great number of different ones that we can go through here. If we want to make our entire image just a grayscale, we can certainly do that as well. And there's going to be a lot more of these added in time as well. I'm going to be probably not using this a whole lot today, but I'll be showing a couple of little elements that we can go around and do certain things as well with it. We can just delete that and move on. This is where we're going to be doing all of our line of sight. And all of the line of sight tools work very much like the other ones that we've created. So it's going to be the same exact style of the line tool, rectangle, and ellipse tool. But you can see that we also have a different panel down here. And that's because we, in Fantasy Grounds Unity, we actually have a quite a multitude of different line of sight elements. Besides just walls, we have terrain, doors, and toggleable walls for like secret doors and so on. Let me just jump over to chat. I have a couple of questions over here. I noticed there's two versions of this map. This one showing the interior. Could you set them both on the same image in different layers and hide? You certainly can. And if I come over to the backgrounds, well, that's not where I want to go. I want to go to the maps. And let's say, for example, I drop this right on top of the other one. All I have to do is just turn this map off. I guess I should make sure that they're lined up correctly first, right? We haven't gotten to grids yet, so it's not quite there. But all I have to do is turn this map off, and it will immediately go into... Let me just make sure that these are lined up correctly here. There we go. And yeah, so you can certainly do it. All of these too also come with all of the line of sight. You can see that it's already on here. So when we jump over here, you can see that it's already populated with all the different line of sight. So everything that comes out of a lot of these packages will already have the line of sight already built into them. Let me just jump out of this so that we can look at this real quick. I have another question. Are those rain effects, etc., available only for that map, or is that a general feature? It is a completely general feature. And you can use it, and I'll show you guys how you can use it in lots of different environments, and not just for maps. It's great for handouts and all sorts of different stuff. So there is a ton of things that you can do creatively inside of these tools. I think that once we get into this today, you guys will realize just how robust it is. We're going to be making not only just a map, but we'll be doing some other stuff as well. So yes, you can, and this is a great way of doing this and layering things on top of each other. And all of this will actually happen in real time as well. So I can even come into here and I can just fade out one map to the next, and your players will see that as you fade it out. All of this will happen exactly as it's done. So there's an infinite number of ways that you can actually interact with these maps. All of our line of sight, each one of the particular elements carries with it its own characteristics. And so therefore we have a lot of different environmental kind of effects. And it should be noted, and this is a great tool as well, if we hide a layer, all of the line of sight gets hidden with it. So that you don't have to worry about if you are traveling up through several layers of let's say you were doing a castle or a keep and you had several different floors in that tower. Each layer that you removed would also remove all of that line of sight that's attached to that particular layer. So as you transpose your players from one scene to the next, you don't have to worry about that interaction of line of sight messing with the other layers. Now what we can do is move on to this is the classic fog of war. Now with the line of sight added, I rarely ever use it. It works in the same kind of functionality as it used to. So we're going to be getting into our grids creation now. All of our map packs are set at 100 by 100 naturally. And so when we come in here, and this is what's something that's very, very important that I think that should be stressed, is that the way that Fantasy Grounds Unity interacts with the images is based off of our grid. And so whenever we create a new creation, we always want to make sure that we get into our grid system and we create that first. So if I create this at a 100 by 100 area in here, and if I come back into my layers and I line these back up here appropriately, let's just delete that one so it's not too cumbersome. You'll notice that this is a 25 by 25 gridded space. Now if I change this, let's say we want to put it back down to 50, and when I come back over in here, it's now a 50 by 50 space. So that we can still interact with this and turn it back to a 25 by 25 space. And it has very little impact on the way that everything is done, so that the system itself is smart enough to realize how much things need to be adjusted based off of the grid size. And so whenever I drag something and drop it in here, it's going to do it based off of the size that we set in our grids. It is quite a smart kind of system, and therefore it actually handles a lot of those calculations for us. And it makes lining up grids exceptionally easy. Question: if you place a grid, can you place a layer over that grid in a way that it would obscure the grid? No, you cannot. The grid is its own self that layered on top of it. And so we jump in here and let's just check this out real quick. As we, if we go back into, let's say our tiles, we know that these are set to 10 by 10. And when we move it in here, we see now, oh, it's 20 by 20 because of our grid size. It's now set to this. We can certainly still come in after the fact and change this back down to 10 by 10. But if we want this to happen natively, we need to do that in our grid system first. And so all of our art packages, it's going to change depending on what art assets that you're going to be using. And a good rule of thumb to be doing that, I don't want it to be a good rule of thumb to using it that way will be based off of its resolution. So if you were to open it in, let's say Photoshop, for example, and you saw that its resolution was 100, then you would know to set your grid by 100 by 100. Question: can you change the opacity of the grid? You certainly can. So let's move on. Let me just delete these real quick, and we'll move into our grid here. Once we get into our grid, we have all kinds of grid types. We have hexes, we have diamonds, and we have two types of hexes so that they all interact appropriately. I guess this one, yeah, two types of hexes. And we have total control over the size. Yes, this stream will be saved as a video, absolutely. We have all kinds of ways to deal with this. We also can change its color, just like we can with anything else. So if we want to make it a black grid, we just have to move all of these sizes down. We can change its opacity. So we have complete control over this. With the white background, I'm going to make it, let's make it red, shall we? So it shows up a little bit better. Let's make it red, shall we? Hit OK instead of cancel next time, Joshua. Question: will this be dropped on YouTube so we can rewatch it? There's a lot of info here. Yes, absolutely. In fact, I'm putting together an entire series of all of the different tools. So you'll be able to actually look up specific information that you'll want, and there'll be an entire YouTube series for you guys. So one more question here. Can you explain grid versus scale and how to get a grid to standard 5-foot squares? Okay, so the square size is based off of the rule set. So as in like classic Dungeons and Dragons, every square is going to be 5 foot. That's going to be dictated by the rule set. So once you come into the actual orientation, all of those sizes are going to be that way. I believe that you can come in and change the size, but that's not something that my expertise really deals with. So that's a better question for Doug's stream tomorrow when he does the campaign kind of stuff. He would have a much more information about how the interaction between the real world sizes versus the grid sizes. But what I can show you is, for example, I'm in the process of creating a whole series of isometric tiles as well. And if we wanted to create isometric tiles, obviously we're going to be using a diamond-shaped grid, but we want it to be wider than it is tall. So all we have to do is change the aspect lock ratio, and we can create very quickly an isometric grid. And all of it will work perfect inside of the system. So not only can you create any grid that you want to, but you have an unbelievable amount of control. And as always, even like in Fantasy Grounds Classic, we can nudge our grids around and change its dimensions. And we can even use our mouse to set up our grid in any way that we want to. So we can drag this out and match it to any sort of grid that we actually come across. So there's a vast number of ways that we can deal with each one of those. So that goes through all of the basic functionality of all of the different tools. So do you guys have any further questions about the tools before we begin to move on and we begin to actually start creating some cool stuff in here? Also, it should be noted that any sort of images that you want to import, all you need to do is push this little folder button and it will pop up the actual area. And anything that you drag and drop inside of here, you can quickly, it'll instantly update right inside of your assets window. So here we have a couple of questions. Let's check them out here. Will there be upright rather than top-down token art assets available to show characters and monsters on isometric maps? That's something that I'm actually working on. So yes, hopefully in the future we'll have a whole bunch of different assets from all sorts of perspectives. Another question here is, how do you remove square and replace that with a different grid? All you have to do is, once you have set your grid, it'll update in real time. So I can change all of these and do whatever I wish. I could even make this 12.3 by 12.3 if I want to. So once I've set my grid, I just have to change it to another grid size, and we're off. It's all updatable in real time. Okay, so if Gravenhurst, if you are in a map, the map might have its own grid printed on it. So many maps are already will have a grid placed right into the actual system itself. So if that's the case, you can't do anything on it. Yeah, unfortunately. So in my mind, oftentimes it's best to get a non-gridded map and then set the grid to however you wish. It can be a little bit more difficult, but it gives you a lot more freedom in what you're trying to do with it. Yeah, that's exactly correct, Lucifer. It allows you that freedom, right? And with it, the more freedom that you have, the more that you're able to do with the tools. And inside of Fantasy Grounds Unity now, you can actually create any image you wish. There is so much that we can do with it, and so I'm so unbelievably excited to show you guys some of these tools and how to use them. All right, does anyone else have any further questions? Yeah, here we go. Question, is the grid in this tool set separate from the grid that the character tokens will lock to, or is it the same? Nope, it's the same. It's exactly the same. So if I were to come over here, and I think I have a couple of different characters in here, and we always want to drag from our combat tracker. And I'm going to get back into my play mode over here. And if I grab these guys and I drag them onto here, you can see that there they do. They populate this grid perfectly. It's an old token that I created a long time ago. So it's exactly the same grid system. Yeah, lining up grids in FGC was a little bit difficult. Oh yeah, Lovecraftian themed assets would be awesome. I totally agree, Pat. I'm a huge Lovecraft fan. Great. So if there's no further questions, let me just delete these tokens. And we're going to be moving in here. I'm going to reset my grid up here. I'm going to put it back to a square, and I'm going to make sure that it's 100 by 100. That's what we're going to be working on. I can keep this red for now. If it's not quite visible enough, we can change it later. But you'll see that I'll be zooming in and out a lot here, and we'll be jumping around. If I move too fast or if I don't explain something totally, just jump into chat and let me know, and I will do my best to explain further. Question: limitations in FGC is to add labels to maps. Is it still the case in FGU? Labels for players with shortcuts or images, names, etc. Right. There's no text functionality yet inside of the map tools. That is something that I would love to see included, though, and something that I've already put on my personal wish list is render text fields. I think that would be great, and I will show you why in a little while in some of the other art packages that I'll be demonstrating today. And so we're going to be building a nice little scene here, and I'm going to show you a couple of different ways that we can go about it, and I'm going to show you all of the different tools in their complete and functionality and some tricks and tips and tricks that I use to greatly enhance the speed at which you can create areas. And so it's really, really, really fun. I'm going to get back into my layers panel over here, and I'm actually going to be dragging and dropping some of these tiles out and to create just a small little area here that we're going to then populate with all kinds of different stuff. And I'm going to need some of your guys' help in some decision making and what we put and where we put it. And I think that we're going to be adding like a river running through it, lots of different foliage and some trees, and making a nice little natural area here. We're even going to be putting in, well, actually, you know what? Instead of a river, I think what we'll do is we'll put in like the side of a lake or something, a little shoreline. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to drag and drop some of these elements out here. It's just very easy to do. I'm going to do 2 of these, I think, and I'm just going to duplicate this and set it right on top. I'm going to make sure that, let's see here, all of these line up to our grid properly. And then I'm going to grab some of these other elements. Let's drop this guy here. And maybe we'll do something like this right in here. And you can see we've created this nice little area in here that we can actually interact with here. This is going to turn out to be a 20 by 20 area. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a folder. And I'm going to double click on this folder and I'm going to rename it, we can just call it ground. And I'm going to begin to add all of these different elements to my folder. So all we have to do is just grab each one individually and drag it and drop it right onto our folder. Oh, I missed there. And once it's all set in stone there, I can just close this up. And if I so wish, I can now interact with this all as one unit. I don't have to worry too much about dealing with this again. If I want to, if I'm worried about moving it around, I can just hit the L key and lock this. Or I can just click on the lock area over here. And it'll lock, as you can see, every subsequent every image that I put down into this folder. Now I'm going to create two other folders before I get going here. Question. Nope, I already answered that question. Any other questions? No. Trying to keep on chat. It's hard to. I'm not a good multitasker. I don't know if you can tell. I'm going to create two other folders here. This first folder, I'm going to call this. Let's call this. Let's just call this plants. Oh, whoop. I didn't want to do that. I've accidentally done something bad, guys. Let's start that up again. Minor issue there. I accidentally tried to drag a folder into another folder, and then there was a terrible problem. But we're totally fine. We're pushing forward, everyone. So let me get into my GenCon seminar here. We'll pull out our little test map. So I'm going to make a new folder. Let's get into our actual elements over here. And let's move over into here so I don't have the same problem again. And we'll call this one plants. And then I'm going to make a new folder and call this one trees. We're still in early access, so there's going to be a couple little bugs here and there from time to time, but they're constantly getting squashed and things just improving all the time. Now in these next folders, what I'm actually going to be doing is I'm going to be using painting layers. And I'm going to actually add a painting layer inside here. I'm going to unlock this for a moment. And I'm going to just make one new layer here, a painting layer. And I'm going to call this ground texture. And I'm going to drag this right into my, I'm going to drag it right onto it. And I want to make sure that it's on top of these other layers here. Get in there. Oh, maybe it's because these are locked. I want it to be above all of these other things. Get back into my assets here, and it's not there. It's in images. And once we get into this area here and we go into our decorations are where we're going to find. Yes, yes, that's exactly right. I grabbed the wrong thing, and it was a terrible situation. How would you see the square grid? The grid will always be on top unless I turn it off. And in fact, right now, why don't we turn it off so that we can really see what we're trying to create here. Now, inside of our decorations is where we're going to find all of these different elements that we can kind of build these things up with. I want to be in my painting tools, and as you can see here, I have this one particular layer that's selected, right? What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to grab some of these elements, and I'm going to paint them in with using my stamp tool. And this is where things can get really fun. And let's say we increase the size here quite a bit. I'm going to make sure that I'm in my stamp tool. And if I just put something down here, you can see that I can create a nice little layer in here that is indicative of whatever image that I've dragged into my area over here. There's a little bug that doesn't show it. Sometimes you have to switch back and forth between the areas here. Now, this is great and all good, but one of the things, I'm just going to hit Control Z and undo that. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to drop down my opacity of this, maybe something down around 100. And you can see it's very subtle now. Now I can begin to, I don't want my line tool, I want my stamp tool. I can begin to paint this around, rotating it every once in a while to so I don't get too much built up. I don't want to have it too repeating, so I rotate it once in a while and flip it around and that kind of stuff. But now I can begin to paint this around and get a very natural kind of looking area in here. And this is just a few clicks as I go around. Certain other areas I might want to grab and drop this in. Let's see, let's make this like a bit bigger. Yeah, there we go. Make sure I have the stamp tool selected. And you can see that these are some pretty complex little areas in here of lots of interesting kind of ground textures. Again, I can come in here, I can change its color, but I'm just going to drop down its opacity again. And maybe not that much. Let's drop it down to like 200. And I can begin to paint this around, creating lots of cool and interesting little areas here. And this is all layered right on top of what I've created before. I got a question over here. Let's jump over here. How do you rotate the stamp with the keyboard? I don't rotate it with the keyboard. I always use this button. I'm not exactly sure if you can rotate with the keyboard, actually. It's a great question, but I'll find out. And we can use all of these different elements to kind of paint this stuff around. Right, so we can go back and forth and create all kinds of cool stuff here. We have rocks and all of these different elements that we can interact with here. Now that I have some more little interesting stuff in here, what I'm actually going to do at this moment is I'm going to switch up and we're going to go into our brushes. And I have lots of different water brushes and all these other things. Yes, I'll be the Bob Ross of FG. I'll do some happy trees here in a little bit. Can you randomize the rotation each time you place it? You cannot currently, Lucifer. But that's something that we've actually talked about. And not only randomizing as you place things, but being able to corroborate a bunch of images and having it randomly pick between images. So that's something that we've definitely talked about. We have no plans yet to initiate it, but it has been discussed. Can we create our own effects? Like as in effects as in the effects tab? No. But you can create lots of interesting, cool effects, and I'm going to show you guys how to do that as well. Yep, you can scale as well and do all of that stuff. So I will oftentimes change the scale of things as I'm going, and we can turn off the aspect lock ratio and do lots of different stuff. You have complete control as you paint around your landscapes and everything that you create here. I'm going to actually switch over to the line tool here, and I'm going to grab one of these water areas here. And actually, you know what? First, before I do that, I'm going to switch back over here into my tiles, and I'm just going to grab a couple of these water tiles and drop these out over here. Maybe this one and this one. And these all line up seamlessly as well. I think yeah, that's good. That's going to be good. And I'm going to drop these down. I want to put these underneath my painted layer here again. So I'm just going to grab them. Sometimes it's a little bit tricky to grab these over here. There's an issue that we haven't figured out quite yet with selecting these. If you just resize the window slightly, you'll be able to grab it. It's a little bit of a pain, but it'll certainly be fixed before release. Coming back into my painting area here, I want to go back up into my brushes, grab this guy, make sure that he's loaded in there. I'm going to make this quite wide. I think, yeah, maybe something like this. And as you can see, whoop, I'm going the wrong direction here. I'm going to actually drop this down maybe a little bit to something like this. Yeah, let's go in there. And what I'll do is I'm just going to begin to paint out my little coastline here. I'm going to do a little bit of interaction here. I'm going to go back and forth a little and paint it across here. And you can see it just calculates all of this stuff nicely for me. And now what I can do is I can come back into my decorations, and I got a whole bunch of these nice little rocks and whatnot. I'm going to drop this painting layer down here as well. And in this painting layer, I'm going to switch over to my stamp tool. I'm going to grab some of these guys and make these a bit bigger. Let's make it pretty square, like 3 by 3. And if I want to rotate it, I can place them in and amongst some of these other areas and begin to paint them around. With my aspect lock ratio off, I can change a lot of the dynamics of these, so it doesn't seem to be so to repeat as much. I can grab some of the other elements as well. My keyboard's kind of off tilter here. This is not my classic kind of working environment, so and we can add lots of cool little elements in here and really add up a lot that's going on here. Is there an easier way to move layers around? When I move them with the mouse, it seems to be super sensitive and hard to get into the right place. And I just discovered you can layer effects. Yes, currently there is no easy way to move your layers around, but I found that, as I said, you can just grab one and move it around. It's quite simple. And if you look at this very carefully, you can see that you get this line, which means it's going to drop it in between those two elements. So it is quite it's quite comfortable once you get used to how the system works. And so I've painted in some of these other elements. We can change some of the dynamics here. Let's turn this off and maybe make it, well, actually, you know what? Let's make it shorter and wider. Not that wide, though. And it should be noted that you can use decimals in here as well. And so we can paint these in and create some pretty complex little areas here quite quickly. Now, let's say that I painted this all in and I've decided that I wanted to have like a nice little like beachy area over here. It's quite easy to do. And also, we noticed that we have a little bit of a divide in here, and we want to get rid of that. So we have a whole bunch of different tools in here that we can do this. And I'm going to start to show you some really interesting, cool kind of stuff that we can do here. I'm going to grab this actual... Let's turn that back on. So I have this nice little blank area of brush that's going to be used for our water areas here. And then look what I'm going to do. I'm actually going to drop down my opacity here to something like 50, so it's very faint. And now I can begin to paint in some nice little gradients in here. I'll make it a little bit stronger so you guys can see it better on your screen. I jump right up to 100. And what I can do is I can actually, by controlling my opacity here, I can paint in some nice little layers. And you'll see this in a second. You'll see how it begins to blend this out exceptionally well. And so you can do lots of really fun and cool stuff by playing with all of these different elements. Coming back into my decorations, I can grab like this round dirt tool, and I'm going to switch over to my stamp here. This is set to be 4 by 4. And with something like this, what I can do is I can drop again down my opacity to something maybe around, I want to do 100. So it's nice and faint. And right over the top of all of this stuff, I can begin to paint in my shoreline. And I can fade this out. And again, I'm going to rotate it once in a while. And I'm going to make this into a little beach area. I have total control over the size of this, so if I want to get in and do things a little bit more securely, We certainly can. And then I can switch back over and jump into my brushes. Again, grab this water brush and we'll set it to maybe something like this size. Drop down its opacity. And what I'll do is begin to paint this over some of these areas. So it's as if the water is coming up. I can come back and forth between these, and you can see that I can spend as much time as I want to invested into these map creations. Layering up lots of cool kinds of effects and all sorts of goodies. Can you confine? Let's see. We have a couple of questions over here. Let's jump over here. So there isn't an actual blending stump tool. No, there is no. No, we can do it with our opacities, and we can do it with all kinds of different other ways of working around it. Can you confine an effect to a folder, or does the effect only apply in layer order? It only affects in layer order, but you can be very inventive with it. So if we have a water background like this, we could put that, so we could drop, let's say, for example, if you wanted to do this in a particular way, it takes a little bit of planning. But if I were to drop these water layers down, let me just do that for you guys really quickly. I'm going to put them underneath all of these other ones. So let me just see here. So if you have a problem moving them, all you have to do is readjust your the size of your window, and then you can move them freely. But now I can create a new effects layer, right? All of our new layers are going to be at the top. And let's say I go down and I want to use my ocean, right? So you can see what this does. I drop this down underneath, and so now we have some graphical errors here where it's going to be affecting this, but we can plan around this. But you can see that it's only affecting the water at this time. All of these layers that are above it, it no longer affects. I got to get it underneath there. That's why. So you can see you can actually have the water effect, and it's only affecting the water. So it adds a really nice kind of element to it as well. Question: I've tried painting the water line with the shoreline brush, but it's opposite of the preview is showing in assets. Did something get flipped? No. Okay, so the way that it works is it's the direction in which you draw in. And that's a really great question that we should kind of explore here really quickly. I'm going to grab something that is quite obvious. I'll grab this brush again, and I'm going to make it quite large so that you guys can kind of see what's going on. I'll make a new layer so that there wasn't, we can just delete it after the fact. So you can see that this is its orientation, right? It's assuming that you're going to be painting up. And so as I click and I drag up, you can see that it's going to create my shoreline this way. But if I flip it so that it goes the other direction, now when I go up, it's the opposite. So you can use these tools as well. Yeah, it's probably just the resolution isn't good enough to show you the actual ocean effect. Yeah, so I'm just going to delete that out. So yes, the orientation has to be correct, but also you can control it by the direction that you go in. And the reason why that is so when we switch over, let me just demonstrate this one more time. If we switch over to our circle, you can see that this kind of comes out from the middle. But if I flip it and I pull it out, it's going to actually create like a little pond. Now this is much too large. I'd have to do a smaller size to demonstrate this properly. Let me just go like down to like half the size here. But you can see that you can create something at this size, and then if I flip it horizontally, I can do the opposite. So there is a little bit of getting used to just how the tools themselves function. Now let's jump back into our decorations here as we continue our building process. Let me just check the time, make sure everything's going good. Yeah, we're doing well. Excellent. So we're going to jump in here, and now I'm going to start to get into my plants area here. I'm going to close this up. We've done enough with our ground. I'm going to make a new painting layer, and I'm going to drop this down into my plants. And we can rename each of our layers as well if we want to get very specific and do all of these things. And now I'm going to switch over to my stamp tool, and I'm getting into some of these nice little areas in here. Now we have a whole bunch of different stuff in here. You can delete the layer a couple of different ways. So if I make a new layer, I can just hit the delete button, usually, or I can just push the down at the bottom here. There's a little trash icon. So now we're going to start to get into some fun stuff, and I'm going to show you guys some really cool and awesome ways that you can populate your maps very quickly. And yeah, if whatever layer you have selected, Gravenhurst. So if I make a new layer, I have this layer selected, and I click on this little trash can, it just deletes that layer. There's nothing that actually pops up. So I have this nice little plant. I'm going to start to paint this guy around. It's set at 1 by 1, and I can change that. I might change it to like 1.5, and let's do like 1.5, which is a good size for a nice little bush to be. And so what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to jump into this painting layer, and I'm going to be using my stamp tool for this. We can also change its color if we so desire. I could make it a little bit, any number of variety of different color combinations if I so wish, but I'm going to keep it at its original for right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint this around, and I'm going to make some nice little areas in here, some bushes, rotating every once in a while and layering these on top of each other. And you can see that this makes a nice little area in here. So now what we can do is, now that we've created this little area, maybe I'm going to do a little bit more and layer a couple on top so it doesn't look too repeating. What I can do is I can duplicate this layer, come over into my Layers tab, and I can just move this wherever I wish. I can also rotate it. I can even change its size. So I can begin to very quickly populate this map by painting out sections, duplicating those sections, and then reorganize them on my map. It is unbelievably fast, and you'll be able to save yourselves a ton of time creating some really naturally looking hello, Moses. You will have to buy it if you are not a Kickstarter backer. Here is the location it is on the store. So you would have to purchase it if you actually backed the Kickstarter, then you will get it for free. If you did back the Kickstarter and you don't see it, we can certainly look into it for you and get it for you. It should automatically download it. It's not a module that you have to actually import through your library. It'll just be in your assets. Yeah, no problem at all. I am happy to help in any way that I can. So we can begin to paint these things around, and we can add a whole bunch of different elements very, very quickly. I can do this again, add another painting layer. As long as I'm in this tab up here, I can move it around. You're not going to be able to move it around while you're in the painting tab. You've got to make sure that you switch over to your layers tab. And you can see we're beginning to populate tons of elements in here very, very fast. And again, we're only using one image to create all of these different bushes. And so therefore, the system is being taxed very little to do so. One image gets sent out to all of our players. So it's exceptionally handy to do. I've also included in here lots of pre-made little sections, so you can just drag and drop these out if you so wish. So there's an infinite variety of creations that you can actually manage to do inside of here. Mixing and matching these will give you a tremendous amount of benefit of use. But we're not going to be using these right now. We're going to be building up all of these layers ourselves. And next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to jump into some of these layers, and I'm going to actually create another painting layer. And I'm going to drop this down underneath the other ones, and I'm going to have some plants that are poking out from underneath them. And so I'm going to load up this guy. Well, I want to make sure that I'm in my painting tools, and I have this particular layer selected. And now I'm going to start to paint this guy. Well, I don't want my line tool. Oh, I want my stamp tool. And I'm going to begin to paint this guy popping out from underneath all these other areas in here. And this is where things really get fun. And we begin to have a whole lot of fun creating all of this stuff together. Question, can we create a tile with this and save it into the assets? Not currently, Wergy. No, you can't currently. I would love to have a copy-paste kind of feature from one aspect to another, but currently everything that you create stays in the one particular image, the way that Fantasy Grounds kind of calculates all of that stuff. But hopefully in the future, we'll be able to create our own little assets out of other assets, and then be able to drag and drop those into other creations. That is my goal. Once we have quite a lot of plants around, maybe we'll do one other plant in here for variety. I'm just going to maybe make this like 2 by 2. Let's make it a little bit bigger. And we'll drop a couple of, whoop, that's too big. So currently when you hit Control-Z while you're inside of a folder, it drops whatever layer you were just working on to the very bottom. Which is just a bug that will get fixed, no problem. So I'm going to jump in here. Let's do 2 by 2. Maybe even 1 by 1. Yeah, we'll do a couple of these guys around just to break up the image a little bit, add a little bit of extra color. Question, are the image assets proprietary, or can we make our own in Photoshop, GIMP, etc.? No, you can make your own. In fact, I've done, Dan, a whole series before Fantasy Grounds got into early access on how to create a lot of assets all by yourself inside of Photoshop. And those are all on our YouTube channel. And so it's a very simple process to create any of your own assets. And Rylan, yeah, I agree. It would be a great ability to do that. Question, all of those assets items that you're adding to the map, do they come stamped with their own LOS elements, or will we need to ensure we add them to those brushes to ensure that they're there? While painting, painting does not incur any sort of line of sight. If you drag and drop them, so for example, all of these trees and whatnot have their own line of sight already attached to them. You can tell that because of this little wall. But if I paint out the tree, it does not. So the tile system includes line of sight. But here's the really cool thing about using the painting system. So if we jump in here, let's say I have this old stone wall. Oh, I want to put it in here. I'll make a new painting layer as we jump over here real quick. And I'll make this 1 by 1. Once I jump in here and I begin to, maybe I'll make it 0.5. Let's say we have an old stone wall that comes down through our area here. And it's quite tall. So it's going to incur some line of sight. And we painted all of this out. All we have to do is jump over to our line of sight area with this selected, and we just duplicate that painted layer as line of sight. So in my mind, I actually prefer using the painting tools and then creating my line of sight from them, or adding it in individually rather than the pre-generated ones. But yeah, you have total control over all of that stuff. Question, you probably can't answer this, but do you know when the FGU will be available on Steam? So what we're waiting for on Steam is the Steam end of things. They have to actually write some specific code to accommodate Fantasy Grounds Unity. And once that's all set and done, it should be good to go. I believe that Steam is, or our kind of soft launch is going to be October. I think that's what we're shooting for, but I'm not exactly sure. Yeah, the duplicate paint layer for LOS is an amazing addition. I love it. Um, Question, the brushes are much brighter than the ground tiles. Can you add an adjustment layer to cut the saturation of the plant layers? What you can do, and not currently because it's painted, but in the event of the future, what you will be able to do is come into your layers panel and adjust it by clicking on the folder that's attached to all of these different ones, and then being able to adjust it after the fact. This used to function in a previous build, but it was taken out for the current time while other things are being worked on, but it will be added back in. So the question will be, you will be able to go in after the fact once you've painted all your stuff and do adjustments. Yes, just like you can do with tiles currently. So you'll be able to drop down the saturation, you'll be able to drop down all sorts, change their colors, their opacities, everything. Okay, so now that we've got some of our plants down, I think that we should jump over and do some trees. What do you guys think? So I'm going to drop my painting layer into my trees folder. I'm going to make sure that I have it selected and I'm in my painting tools. And I'm going to go back over to my stamp. And I got a whole bunch of different trees here. And I even have some big kind of conglomerate ones, right? I think that we'll make this quite large. And we can begin to paint these in rather large kind of groupings, or we can do maybe some smaller groupings as well. And we're going to layer these right on top of all of this different stuff. Whoop. So there's a current, slight little current bug where sometimes it holds on to the last image. All you have to do is rotate the image and it will come right out of that. And we can begin to paint some of these trees around. Let me just check the time to make sure that we're going well here, moving right along. What I like to do is to add my trees at this stage, and then I begin to populate from underneath of them. One of the things that you don't want to do is you don't want to get into a situation where you develop a lot of ground creations and then cover it all up with your trees. And one of the great things about adding my trees into its own particular folder is that I am able to reorganize these very, very easily and add things in between them. So what I'm going to do at this moment is I'm going to start to populate some of the stuff underneath the area here. And I'm going to build out some rocks and some other environmental kind of things. And maybe we'll paint a path in and do some other kind of environmental effects as well. So we have all kinds of these other tools to our disposal, other elements to our disposal. We want to make sure that we're going to use them appropriately. So maybe we want to have some rocks and maybe we're going to drop them down in underneath our plants here. And we're going to make them an appropriate size. And have some of these elements that are kind of poking out here and there. And maybe we even use something like this, and we can rotate it. And put this along our coastline here a little bit so it looks like it's dipping into the water a little. And we can really have a whole lot of fun. No. Anytime that you're using any of the painting tools, line of sight's not going to be included into them. If I just drag them and drop them as like a stamp onto the workspace, then it will have the line of sight connected to them. And now that I have some of these elements in here, I think that I'll jump into my brushes again and maybe grab a nice little trail here. Well, I want to make sure I'm in my painting tools and have my line selected. It will make it too wide. And I'm just going to paint this in, maybe coming down through here. I can drop this down into any layer that I so wish. If I want to have some interactions with some other layers and whatnot, I can build things on top of this trail. I can do all sorts of other things. In fact, I can even, if I so desire, maybe I'll just come into this particular painting layer and just do it right here. I might drop down the opacity of what this actually is and paint it out so that it's quite subtle across my landscape. If I don't want to do it that way, I can maybe increase the opacity slightly. Let's make it 200. But this will allow me to have a little bit of control over what's going on, and it will also allow me to, I double clicked when I shouldn't have. But that's okay, because I'm going to line it right back up and keep it going. And I can grab that same brush that I was using before, and I can add in some other elements and fade that off if I so desire, and do all kinds of that fun stuff as well. Question, can you import an existing image, a Photoshop map, for example, and do editing on it? Yes, you certainly can. And we're going to go over that briefly. I'm going to grab a map, and we're going to be able to enhance it right inside of FGU. Info, seeing deleting, not clearing the last object placed from the workspace map, but it's gone from the list on the right. If you then mouse wheel zoom, the grid repaints itself into infinity. Can force a refresh by placing a new object. Clears the map workspace. Oh, interesting. That's probably a bug, and I'll see if I can reproduce that later. Thanks for letting us know. Question, is there an eyedropper for color or used images so that you can quickly go between assets and current map? There isn't an eyedropper, but what there is the hexadecimal code. So I can grab this hexadecimal code, and after I've created it for a particular element, and then I can paste that into any one of the color pickers for any particular layer and reproduce it. If you drag the tree layer into the LOS, what happens? It correctly calculated a linear feature, the wall, but these are isolated elements. Oh, you mean like if we were to take a, like the painted trees, for example, and go into our line of sight and hit duplicate as paint layer? Is that what you mean? As far as I'm aware, the duplicate only works with the line tools, not with the stamp tool. Let's see. Will there be support for recognizing wall from other map makers like DPS or Dungeon Draft? I believe that there may be some community created crossover tools, but I'm not definitively sure about that. Is it possible to import MP? or animated GIF files for maps. No, currently we have no support for video or animated files, unfortunately. But I would love to see them in the future. So what we can do now, and this is where I start to get have a lot of fun in some of these elements, and we're gonna get into some more advanced. Oh, we also have some tracks if you ever wanted to do like footprints going across the sand or whatnot. You can certainly do that as well. All of these different elements that we can use here. We have certain effects as well. These are layered elements that we can put on top of particular images and so on and so forth. These effects images is how I created, when we look back at the original map that I showed of the witch's lair here, all of that soap scum, all of that swamp scum that I placed across the water was all created with those. So what we're going to do is, now that we have all of our base elements in here, we're going to start to add some really cool stuff in here. And I'm going to show you guys how to actually do this. I'm not exactly sure. Let me just look in here. I do not believe that I have included any sort of shadow information in some of this stuff. Yeah. So what we're going to do is we're going to come back into our data, and all you have to do, I have a whole conglomerate of images that are art pack that's all going to be based off of shadows and light sources, and we're going to be using these right now. So let me just pull this over here so you guys can kind of see what I'm doing. This is some of my favorite stuff. I'm going to be using my stamp tool. I'm going to increase the size of this, at least for now, and I'm going to drop down its opacity quite low. Let's do 50. So you can see I have a very subtle little, I don't know if you guys can actually see this, but I have a very subtle little stamp that I'm going to be using here. And I'm going to be creating a new layer. And I'm going to take this layer and I'm going to drop it underneath some of these other elements. And I'm going to start to paint this out in some shadows in here. And I can change the size of this and its orientation and all of that stuff. But I'm just going to click around and do some subtle shadows coming off of these trees and underneath some of these other elements. And this is going to help really bring my map to life here. Many of the art packs that we have include shadows in them, but they're super easy to make. And I cover them in my regular Saturday streams as well. And you can see it's a really nice kind of orientation here. Now I'm going to create another layer, and I'm going to do these right on top. And I'm going to begin to add these elements along the edge of these trees as I just kind of paint around. I'm just moving my mouse around, and then I am actually clicking every so often. And this takes very little effort. I'm going to drop this down, and I'm going to do even some on these bushes. And we don't have to be exact. It's just, this is just all about having fun and enhancing our images a bit. Don't try to be too precise about it. Everything in nature is not precise at all. So certainly don't feel like you have to and you can see how drastically that changes the entire system. And I'm going to do the same thing, except I'm going to do it with a highlight now. And if I scoot this over and I grab this and I drop this into my paint tool here, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to drop down its opacity to be quite low. I'm going to start off with it pretty large. And I'm actually going to add, as you can see here, I'm going to paint this right over the top, and this is going to create a nice little kind of, I'll make it a little bit smaller so we can see here. Add some nice little highlights along some of these trees. And this is why I am, as I work more and more in FGU, I'm going to make some larger ones too to be in these big open areas here. So we can get some nice little areas where light kind of comes in between. Question over here. When are you regular Saturday streams? It's exactly the same. I stream from 3 to 6 every single Saturday, and I go through all of the different techniques. I showcase everything that's coming out Everything. Oh, finished Fantasy Grounds College. Hey. Um, we do everything. So I'm here every Saturday from 3 to 6. We go through all of our different creation systems. Anything that's new that's coming out in FGU, we talk about it. I showcase any new uh, art related images and packages and fantasy grounds kind of content. And yeah, you guys are all more than welcome to show up every Saturday. Eastern time. Are these light and shadow effects part of different asset set? These are just, these are very simple. So if you go into GIMP or Photoshop and you just have like a soft round brush and you just stamp it right in the middle of an image, that's all they are. These two images that I just used. I am going to be having an entire art package that is dedicated to it. And I can also show you one more thing really quickly before we move on to the next element that I really want to show you guys. Is if we jump over here, and let me get back into these decorations. And I'm going to grab one of these trees, and I'm just going to drag and drop it, right? So I painted in all of these shadows and the little highlight sources, and we made this really idyllic little scene here quite quickly and easily. I probably spent more time talking than I actually spent working. But let's say, for example, I just drag and drop this tree out here, and I want a shadow for it nice and quickly. Well, all I have to do is duplicate this layer, grab its color picker here, drop it down to black, drop down its opacity. Maybe something like, yeah, sure. Let's do 75. And drop it down underneath. And boom, we have created an instant perfect little shadow for our guy here. We want to make sure that our shadow doesn't have line of sight. And so my goal is to be able to do this with all of our painted layers as well. And that will be able to be done. So once we have an entire layer like this that's all painted with trees, and our color picker works on our painted layers again, all we'll have to do is be able to duplicate our entire layer, do a very quick little automated system thing there, and then we can generate shadows for everything. Super fast. So do you guys have any more questions about this before we move on to some of the other elements that you can also select multiple layers by holding down Shift and moving them as a unit without having to put them into particular things there. Maybe this sits right where our... I can make it night. Would you like for me to show you how to make it night? I can make it night. We can do all kinds of neat stuff. I believe that it's, let me just move up here. I believe it's in my junk. I have thousands and thousands of packages and images here, so let me just look through here real quick. I think it's in the jungle one. Yeah, jungle. Effects. Oh yeah, night overlay. So without having to do much, you can pretty easily just create an overlay. I believe our space here is like 30 wide, 20 tall. By taking a solid kind of layer like this that has some opacity, you can quickly turn something to night. You can even adjust how much it interacts with your images. So the whole goal here is I can even make it snowy too. I can paint snow over the top of everything, and we can take one map. We can really spend our time on one map, and then we can change it to whatever we want. Sure, I can do that for you again. Let me just hide this. Oh yeah, let me drop down that opacity a little bit, and I'll just hide it for right now. All you have to do, yep, think in layers. You can certainly make masks and do it that way. So the question is, had a little bit of trouble setting up one of those effects layers, and it's really simple to do. All you have to do is come down at the bottom here and add an effects layer. Once you have an effects layer, make sure that you have it selected and active, and you're in the effects tab. Once you're in the effects tab and you have this layer selected, whatever you pick will get added to this. So let's say I want to make this grayscale. All you have to do is do that. If I don't want it to be grayscale, I can just change it to rain or whatever. Maybe I want to, it's snowing. Yes, you can. You can change the opacity of anything. I can turn the grid back on. I turned it off so that we could actually see everything. But if we so wish, maybe I'll make it white. That'll probably show up the best. What does the parchment look like? That's a good question. Let's check it out. I use the parchment sometimes. It makes it look more like a handout. We can turn the grid off so that you guys can see it a little bit better. We can also go into night vision. We have mist that we can do, having it coming across the area there. There's no print functionality currently, Philip. So as we create our elements, it's the system and the way that it works is it's handled a little bit differently than other image systems. So we do have some limitations as what we can do with it after the fact, but we have such a robust ability to create inside what's housed there. Yeah, there's no way to compress down the layers currently. My one of my big yeah, you could certainly take a screenshot. You can use so this little button here will make this. Let me get some of this stuff out of the way. You can make it full screen almost, and allows you to have a really good representation of it if you're unaware. Any other questions you guys have before we move on to the next installment here? Yeah, no problem, Covis. It's locked because it's not truly locked. It's locked in a particular aspect that you don't have. Like we can't come into our color picker and whatnot and interact with it anymore. But you can still just delete it with the little delete button. Sure. Yeah, yeah. We can do all kinds of things, and depending on where we put our effects layer, right? Remember, um, our layer order is very important. So when we put in, let's say we do our mist. If we want our mist to be above our effects layer, but we can put it underneath it, and you can see how much more subtle it is. And if I come into my my night layer here, and I go back over and I reinstitute all of the opacity here, you can see we can have some really cool, nice, subtle effects. That's a good question. The question is, I noticed that the huge difference between the water effect and the ocean. Would the water effect be more useful for, say, running rivers? I think that it's more. situational for sure. And our effects, we haven't really done a whole lot with the effects yet. So once we get everything else squared away, we'll be looking at those and maximizing those to their greatest potential. But certainly, you can use them in lots of different areas for sure. For sure, Dusk. Yeah, it's gonna be it's these kind of broad things are great as like an overview, but to really dive deep, we need to get into some more specific topics, that we can really look at and do all of that stuff. So now I'm going to, if you guys have any more questions about this, I'm happy to answer them. But I'm going to jump over and we're going to start a new creation here. And we're going to move away from maps for a minute. Let's see what I got for time over here. Oh yeah, we got plenty of time. We're doing great, everyone. And I just would like to take a moment to say thanks to everyone for coming and hanging out. And I hope everyone's enjoying their time here. Let's just see here. Will there be a dedicated assets section in the FG store? I do not know if there's a dedicated assets section. If you go into your assets and you have this little button down here, the store purchases, it will load in a specific search functionality that is only for assets. So it's a really easy way for you to get in there. This desktop theme, this particular theme for Fantasy Grounds Unity, was created by Jen, and this is going to come. It's going to be released. I don't know if it's going to be released soon or if they're going to wait till launch. But there's this one, and then there's a night version as well. And I've also put together a huge package of all kinds of different themes. So you're going to be bombarded with art once Fantasy Grounds gets fully released. There's going to be a ton for you guys. Sure, we can do. Well, the import function. Uh, you mean from the images and maps area? No, I haven't. I haven't done that. I have not. We don't have an exact full release date yet, Hard Bushido, but we're shooting for October. We're the system is very solid now, and we're moving very close, and so hopefully it'll be sooner. But I think October is our yeah soft release in October. Yeah, Steam will be all done by October for sure. If that's the case, Covis, I almost guarantee you that when you go into your 2019 thing, here's a thing that people most often miss. There's a little button down here, the next page. Cycle through. You should have several pages on many of those folders. So if you're looking for something and you can't find it, I almost guarantee you there's a little next page button that you haven't seen. And no, so the question is, will the map effects work on any map uploaded? And yes, they will. All of these functionalities are going to work on anything that you bring in. In fact, all of the images are handled the same now in Fantasy Grounds Unity, so that there's no distinction. You can even use tokens as painting material or tiles if you so wished. Yeah, of course. Great. So what we're going to be doing is I'm going to jump up in here and I'm going to show some other ways that we can use our artistic skills that we've developed inside of Fantasy Grounds Unity and create more than just maps. And maps are great and they're fun and I love them. And it is pretty much something that I do all the time. In fact, we have nice regional maps as well. I put together a wonderful regional map pack if you guys are interested. So to create like world maps like this. It's all done in exactly the same way, and you can create anything that you wish. But what I want to talk to you about, and I think that this is something that is oftentimes looked over, is that more than just maps that you need to create, sometimes we have to create uh, handouts or other artistic elements for our games. And really, the system that we have inside of Fantasy Grounds Unity is phenomenal for doing all of those things. It's exactly the same system. We do it in exactly the same way. We just think about it a little bit differently. One of the first ones in this way is I put together a crest art pack. It's something that you can create all of your own heraldry with, all of your own elements, uh, and it's going to be done just in exactly the same way. And so, as I said in the very beginning, I'll reiterate it now. We can create a new workspace either by right-clicking on our images and maps window and creating a new item, or we can just drag anything from our assets window and just drop it right here and populate it. So let's say, for example, I'm just going to pull this out and it's going to automatically create a new workspace for me. I'm just going to reorganize this a little bit so we have a nice little workspace. And so now what we can do is quickly drag and drop items and begin to create our own symbols and heraldry packs or images for our campaigns and whatnot. These will all just kind of click into the system all by itself. Let me just set this correctly here. If you hold down Control, you can easily move these things around and not have to worry about the actual grid system whatsoever, but you're more than welcome to do so. All of our systems, all of our packages are all set up in the same exact way. You know, you'll have your backgrounds. Gravenhurst, your screen is completely gray. Do you have your line of sight turned on? Oh yeah, wearing your sunglasses. Going into our decorations is always going to be the most prominent amount of images that you have. Usually this is going to be like everything that you need to really populate stuff. So if we were going to create our heraldry here, we could easily just grab maybe like a shield, which is like the classic, right? We have all kinds of different elements that we can use to populate this and create something new. We could place things on our shield and add different elements to it. Maybe, oh, I don't want that one. I want these nice little laurel leaves. What kind of heraldry isn't complete without a helmet? Maybe we'll put it up there. And we obviously need some filigree, right, guys? So we can grab some of this stuff and begin to add this in. We can use our layers over here to drop this down in behind. I want to make sure it's behind my shield, I think. We can change its rotation and do all that kind of stuff. I'm just going to duplicate that one and flip it. Drop it right down next to my other one. Maybe I'll drag in some of these scrolls. I think I'm going to change the angle on these. Yeah, something like that. Looks pretty good. I think that this probably should be, oh, not that one. We'll separate these out a little bit so that we have a little bit more room to work with, and I'll bring this guy down. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop this down behind the helmet. We can go back up into our effects area here. I got some nice little shadow effects. So I might drop this in behind my shield. Increase its size here. Maybe we'll do like 7 by 7 so we get a little bit of that like shadow kind of effect. I think I'm going to make it a little bit taller than, what, not 87, just 8. maybe even 9. Yeah. And I might do a little bit of light in behind the helmet. And once you've created something that's like a handout, okay, so we've got a couple of questions over here. I do recommend mostly using PNG file assets. If you are using something that has any sort of alpha channel, like any sort of transparency, you should use a PNG. But if it doesn't, then I would use a JPEG just because it's going to be so much smaller. Knights of the Octopus, absolutely. And so, for example, if you were going to be creating this for a particular reason, like let's say you were creating your own maybe you're creating your own empire or whatever it is for whatever particular purpose for your games. And once you've created these, we can do the same exact stuff. We can add other effects layers. Go into our effects tab. Maybe we want to make it look like parchment. Or we want to just do like any sort of, maybe we just want to have it in grayscale. We can certainly turn off our grid. We don't need it for something like this. And once we're done, we have this little lock up here. No problem at all, Dustchild. Thank you so much for hanging out and watching. I'm here every Saturday at 3, so I'd love to see you come back. And once we're completed with our image, we don't need to access any of these anymore. All we do is close it up, and we are done. This is now ready to be shared with our players. And we've created our own handout right inside of FG with very little effort. So in case you guys don't know, I probably skipped over this in the beginning. Basic mouse functionality while you're working inside here is your mouse wheel will zoom in and out. Pushing down your middle mouse button will be able to allow you to pan around in here. Nice little question. How do we nest and store that? Well, you don't really need to, right? It's already, there's no way to compile it down into one image. So whenever we want to access it, whatever we've happened to name it, well, we can come in here and name it whatever we want. It's got quite a long name at the moment. And we can call this Knights of Cthulhu. And once we have it, it's already there. It's just like an image that we would normally have in FGC at that moment. Cavaliers of the Kraken. Yeah, I like it. Yeah, there's no need for a save function. It's automatically there. If you had seen at a certain point, I had a slight crash on FGU, and I pulled it back up, and it was everything was right there. So everything has been. Once we have completed with the image, we can go back in and change it at any time. But that's it. It's finished. We're ready to go and add it into our. So what we could do is, if we were creating a story template, we got our new story template here, and we added in whatever we were doing. We can do it exactly the same way we would do with anything. And if we were doing something in our story and we were like, they come upon so and so, and you just, boom, there it is. It is your image that you've created now. Can we store an asset name or coordinated for use in other FGU sessions? Yeah, so This will be here forever unless I delete it. I don't unless I'm understanding the question incorrectly. Um, there's no way to actually compress it down into a single image and export it, but I can export. I can. So this is how it works, right? If I were to go into my library and I were to export it and include it into my export files, as long as I had those assets inside my assets folder, it would rebuild it for me. But if I tried to share that with somebody who doesn't have those assets, then they wouldn't, when they opened up that image file, it would all just be question marks because it would be looking for those specific image files and would not be able to find them. So you would be able to share images with people that you created as long as they also have those assets. Correct. That's right, Dave. All right. So if there's no further questions on something like that or how that's handled, we're going to jump over and we're going to do one more creation. I'm going to start to do some of the more advanced kind of techniques in this last hour and show you guys how you can really kind of take control over a lot of the different aspects. I'm actually going to grab an image that is an external map and bring it in, and then we're going to enhance it inside of FGU. And then I'll show you guys that you can use all of these same effects layers and everything in some sort of other creation here. I think I have one all ready to go here. Let's see here. Maybe I don't. Let me grab one really quickly, and I'll just throw it in here. I'll just pull this over to the side. So have you guys had a great time at Gen Con? Have you guys been playing a lot of games? So let me just grab, here's a map that I made a while ago. I was working on a whole bunch of, I'm just going to go into my assets and I'm going to open up, hit the old folder button. I don't want tokens, I want images. And then I'm just going to drag and drop a map right in here. And I'm actually, so here's the original seller over here, and I made a remake of this. And you can see once I drag and drop it into this folder here we've populated it, I can close this window down. And once I come into my campaign folder here, you'll see it's automatically there. I don't have to restart Fantasy Grounds or do anything special. I've instantly loaded this in. And I'm just going to grab and drop this in here. So this was a map that I had created for, it's like a remake of that Salt Marsh. I forget which map it is. Cellar. So what I'm going to be talking about is how to add in all kinds of different elements into your maps. And let's actually, I'm going to show you guys first how I like to line up my grids and whatnot. So the easiest way to do it, if it's got a pre-made grid system on it like this, is you zoom in nice and close. You make sure that you have your set grid with mouse selected. And then we just drag this out. And boom, we've done it. We have a 300 by 300 grid. It's a very large map, as you can see. It would be something that would be used for probably printing. Oh yeah, thanks. I actually did a whole bunch of remakes of these, and hopefully someday they'll see the light of day. Question: do you have the time to show us a cutout version of the map to reveal a zone that has a different effect under it? Certainly, I can certainly do that. I can do a little add-on over here. Um, and I'm actually going to, I can do a couple of different things for you guys in this last hour. One, let me grab this guy in here too. Here's the original map. Should be just about the same. Now it's a little bit different. So here's the original map. And as you can see, there's, I'll just kind of drop it down in underneath here, and we can, I'll actually, you know what, probably the best way to do this is I'll jump over, I'll just lower its opacity so we can kind of see in between here. And then we can, I'm going to hold down my control, and I'm just going to line this up a little bit better. I think that the size here is a little bit off, so it's pretty close though. Yeah, close enough. Doesn't have to be exact. This is just for demonstration purposes. See that this is quite a bit off, but I probably made some adjustments to it. Anyway, thanks, Dave. So basically, one of the things that I think is so excellent about this, I'm going to just reset this here, about this system, is, for example, we have this map, right? I'm going to just turn this off for a moment. We have this original map here. I'm actually going to reset up my grid for this one, and I'm going to show you guys how you can reduplicate these maps inside of FGU very, very simply, and generate all of your line of sight in doing so by painting out the walls and all of this stuff and putting down a basic floor. And at the same time, I'm going to show how you can leave off particular areas, and you'll be able to, maybe I'll change some of the dynamics of the map and so on and so forth. But I'm going to recalculate this, the size of this map here. It's certainly not, we got to turn off our aspect locked ratio so that I can, to get it appropriate. And it still seems to be a little bit off. This map seems to be pretty wonky in its that looks pretty good. That's close enough, I think. And I'm going to show you guys some really cool techniques for building out walls and to doing all of these different things. So let's jump back up. I'm going to jump in here, and I'm actually going to be using some really simple kind of art packages here. I have one that is an underground art pack that I had created quite some time ago. Here we go. So basically the way this is going to work is I'm going to start off just with some painted layers here. And I'm going to go into my brushes, and I got a few different brushes in here. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to start off with this area down in through here. So I'm going to go into my painted layer, and I'm going to grab this, this little guy in here, and I'm going to set my size appropriately. Maybe we're going to make it 2, maybe 4. Let's see. It's 3. It's supposed to be 3 by 4. So that's where we're going to put it at. And now all I have to do is begin to follow this map around in my own painted layer. And so what I'm going to do, and here's one thing that you want to be aware of. You're always going to be starting exactly where your mouse pointer is, not the image itself. And so if I want to be kind of exact about this, I want to try to line this wall up with it. It's going to be using the actual line here. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start clicking around. And I'm going to begin to paint out this and the system. And I can grab my middle mouse button and not interfere with what I'm actually doing and move this stuff around. So I'm going to start to paint out these walls. This is getting a little bit wonky. Let's redo that. I'm going to start this over real quick because I think I was zoomed in a little bit too far. But basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint around, starting on one corner, as you can see. That's a little bit too tight of a corner, I guess. What I need to do in order to achieve this is I got to drop this down to a little bit smaller so that the system can calculate around those corners a little bit better. And I'm just going to follow this around, clicking. I'm just going to be a little bit conscientious about some of these sharp corners, as you can see there. And I'm actually going to just move that back, and I'm going to fix that corner in a second here, and I'll show you guys how. I got to come in a little bit further. Anytime that the system wants to bend it in a particular way, I can just drop it and then pick it up again. And some of these areas, I might have to go back in and erase some and recalculate them a little bit. But all I'm going to do is pretty much just follow these around. And double click to end it. And there's a couple of little incidents over here. I'm just going to be able to go back in and fix that. I'm going to do exactly the same thing over here. I'm going to do this whole middle section. And I'm just going to be a little bit rougher about this just for time. And then I'm going to line that right back up. It does. If you hold down, you can actually do a continuous line. However, if you hold it down, the Control Z functionality doesn't work properly currently. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you guys, here we have some very straight areas that we want to do. And we don't even need to use our mouse in this kind of scenario. I'm going to use the exact same asset, but I'm going to be doing it in a way, I mean, I can do something. I'll use a different one, I think, actually. Let's look at, and don't forget that we have all of these search functionalities inside of here too. So I'll actually grab one of these stone walls. And we'll do up here with these here. Let's make this an even 5. So with this stone wall, I have some other walls in here as well. I might try something different here. We've already shown off that stone wall today. Let's try something different. I'll actually do one of these old and let's make that rounded down. Sure. I have this old like hand-drawn kind of wall. It's a little bit rough, and it'll add some nice kind of character. What I'm actually going to do is I am going to, instead of using my mouse to move around and recalculate all of these different things, I'm going to use my space bar and my arrow keys. And what this is going to do is going to allow me to do very rigid kind of constructions here, right? And so I can use my space bar. I hit it once, and then I begin to move out. Every time that I move the arrow key, it's going to go into that direction 1 unit of whatever I've set my grid to be. So I can paint this right across, and when I get to an intersection where I want to move again, I just hit my space bar, and then I can move down, hit my space bar again, move across, and then again, and I can now either hit escape and stop that creation and start again somewhere else. But this allows me to move along all of these edges exactly the way that I so desire. So I can do the same here. Whoop. I did not click correctly. Let's see here. So I'm going to start off with my spacebar. Oh, you know what? It'd be good if I actually hit my spacebar. And this is the way that we can actually do some very precise kind of creations here. And we can build out all of these areas very, very quickly. If I don't want to do it that way, I mean, I can always Control Z back. I can grab my square rectangle tool, and I'll make a new painting layer for this. And what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to pull out my rectangle for the entire area. And now I'm going to go back into my layers panel. And if I know exactly how big I want this to be, maybe I want this to be 25. And I want it to be instead, I think just 6 high. It'll automatically readjust this all for me. It looks like it should be 24. I could even at this stage, grab the wrong thing. I could even at this stage move this around here. If I need to readjust it, sorry, I've been looking at chat. Hope I didn't miss anything. And I can continue this process back and forth. I can go back into my painting layer, and if I want to, I can pull out another rectangle here and do it this way. I can use my line tool. And so all the time, there's a great number of ways to do whatever you want to create inside of FGU. You notice that I'm not worrying too much about where my doors are right now, because what I'm going to do after the fact is go in with my eraser, and anywhere where I want to have a door, all I have to do is come back in and just erase away that particular segment and then paint in whatever door I wish. So I don't have to be super I don't have to be too conscientious about how I paint in these different elements. I can just begin to paint away, create all of these different areas, and then build it up as we go. So in this particular example, what I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly paint out the floor. And I am going to add in some water elements. And then what I'm going to do is I can show you how to make the water actually be active in some sort of effects group, while the rest of the image is not. And so I'm going to jump back up into where I was before. Let's just jump up here, get rid of my Stonewall search. I think I was in here. And we can go into our decorations. I think I'll just come in here and go, into my backgrounds first. And I'm going to drag and drop out this background. And I'm going to drop this down underneath my painting areas here. And you can see that this is beginning to populate the area quite nicely. At any time, I can always go into my line of sight and immediately generate all of the line of sight that I want for all of this stuff. So this is why I tend to paint. I have a question over here. With layers and fading, could you do a low tide and high tide version of the ocean? Absolutely. What you can actually do is, and the way that I would do it, is I would set up folders for two separate iterations of my water, and then I could easily just use my the color picker to fade between them, or just turn one on and off, for sure. Which is one of the great reasons why you want to organize everything and keep it all separated in folders. You can also rename any layer at any time for further kind of organization, which is by far my worst skill. I'm going to drop down the opacity of this, so let's jump over here. Just so I can see what's kind of going on here. And I can see what I'm working on underneath. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to jump over into the same exact art package, and I'm going to build up some of these floors, and I'm going to work on some of this different stuff. You can see that we have all the tunnel tiles in here, just like an old kind of style. But you can see all I've done right now is I've used two images to pretty much create this entire area. I'm going to use my tile to fix this little area in here, but I'm actually going to probably paint it on so I don't have to worry about it too much. But I'll do that at the end. And I'm going to come into my decorations, and I'm going to grab one of these like floor areas. I can come into my painting layer here. I'll make a new layer, and I'm going to drop this. I want it to be all the way at the bottom underneath these other layers. And I can begin to just stamp out wherever I want this particular elements to be. I'll make it down. I'll drop it down a little bit so that I can come into these small little areas in through here. And I don't have to be too super precise. I can just kind of be as but you can see how quickly in a very short amount of time you can begin to build up even these rough maps into something that's much more functional. I can now begin to place in all of the other elements that you can see inside there. I can find all of my boats and whatnot. I can grab some other textures. I believe I have maybe even some little elements like this that we can drop in. I believe in the original one that there is yeah, there's like some steps kind of going down there. And so we can begin to populate all of this stuff very, very quickly. I'm going to have to move a little bit faster so that we can get this question. For those floors, are you holding the mouse button down and moving, or clicking, moving, and re-clicking? Clicking, moving, and re-clicking. Currently, there's no functionality for a drag of the stamp tool. But if I wanted to, I could load any image into any area that I wish and make it kind of that same way, right? So I could take this little stairs tool, right? So let's, if I were to remove this, make a new layer. And let's say I want to make this, I'll make it a little bit large, maybe 1.5. So this is loaded into the line tool. And what I can do is I can just begin to click and drag this up and begin to make other elements out of it. So you can mix and match all of the different elements that we have and create interesting little advancements in these things. I'm actually going to, let's bring our opacity back up for this. And I'm going to quickly begin to populate some other elements around and add some interesting kind of cool stuff. I can come back into my ground layer here. I'll grab, oh, I want to make sure I'm in my painting layer. Some nice textures here. I'll drop down the opacity of this texture to maybe 150, and I can begin to paint some of this stuff around, adding some more variety to these images. And so what I really wanted to show you in creating this is that I'm going to be using the line tool in here to create some very cool kind of shadow effects coming off of the walls. And so I'm going to create a new layer, and I'm just going to double click on it, and I'm going to name it shadows, just so that I know that this is the layer that I want to do on my shadows. I'm going to put it underneath my walls, but I'm going to keep it above my ground here. And if I come back up into my top layer here, and I'm going to grab this shadow brush. I'm going to make it too wide, and I'm going to drop down its opacity down to like 50, so it's very subtle. And with this selected, I am actually going to grab my rectangle tool. I'm going to come just on the inside of my wall here, and I'm going to begin to drag out my shadow. That's a little bit too light. Let's try 100. Yeah, there it is. And I want it to be very subtle, and I want to be able to build up my layers with this. And I'm going to increase the opacity here, and I'm going to decrease my size. And I'm going to do this a couple of times. And as you can see, I can just build out some really nice subtle shadows underneath some of these things. And I can do this room by room if I wish. All of this is going to get dropped right underneath my walls. And I can do this in layers as well if I want to build up the shadow content. And really begin to define a whole bunch of different, yeah, shadowing is fun, isn't it? And we can see if we turn off our shadows, we can see what a drastic difference it does for our creation here. Again, I also like to use the stamp tool in this kind of scenario. And I'll pull up maybe like a size of 2. I'm going to make it actually a little bit oblong here. Let's make it wider, maybe 3 and a height of only 1. So I get this kind of shape. I'm actually going to exaggerate a little bit more so it's a little bit more rounded. And drop this down to 50. And then I'm going to come off of this corner up here. Make sure I have my shadows area connected. And I'm going to begin to fade this out from certain areas a little bit more. And I can rotate this and do some more along these sides. So it's just like in anything. It's always just about building up some of these layers and taking your time a little bit and creating some really interesting, cool little areas. So far, I have only used 4 images in the creation of this map. So that's only 4 images that are going to get sent to my players. I guess maybe 5 images with this one. Looks like I accidentally put one over there. And I can even come in and start to do some more stuff down here. It looks like that I'm going to need to create a new, let's see, what layer is this? I should have named these as we went. I'm going to just move my shadow layer here. And let's move this a little. Drop it up there. So I can paint right over the top of the, oh, I didn't want to do that. And we can just paint all of these little areas in through here and add a whole lot of dynamic elements to our map here. We could probably even take this guy and put it on top and drop its opacity down. And see if we can't get a little bit of a crossover of some of the different elements. Like some of this nice little texture that we have on the outside here. And we can begin to paint around some more of these. I want to make sure I'm in my correct tool here. And so in doing this, what I would do, now let's say we want to create our little water area down here as well. We can paint in our water down into this section, and by keeping it completely separated from these other sections, we can now add in a particular effects layer to that water, whatever is layered here. And I can have a little bit of a nice interaction between the two by using 2 separate layers. So let's look up our water here. I use the search function quite often inside of FGU. As I said, I have thousands and thousands of images, so it can take quite a lot of work. I think that I'll actually, probably the best way to do this would be to layer in, I can use my water brush that I used from the 2019 pack. I'll create a new layer. I'll double click on it and name it water. I accidentally clicked outside there, so we can delete that. I'll drop down the water. I want it to be above my background, but below everything else. And I'll make sure that I'm in my line tool, and I will make it maybe 4 wide. I just want to kind of paint in. Oh, thanks, Fantasy Grounds College. I think that it's one of my favorite things is creating textured layers and all kinds of other stuff. Oh, I have a couple of questions. I've been slacking on chat. Sorry, guys. Do the objects that have the LOS built in only work if you drag the image directly from the assets onto the map rather than stamping them with the paint tool? That is correct. Anything that you paint does not inherently have any sort of LOS in them. However, you can add the LOS after the fact, depending on what you're doing. Question, are the Windows and Mac versions of FGU at equivalent stages of development? I believe so, yes. And I'm actually going to use this line tool, and I'm going to paint this in, this base layer, as I'm just going to pull this right across all the way through here. So I'm just going to kind of do something like this. to create this base layer. And then I'm going to use some different elements. I'll fade off the edge here, and I'm actually going to drop in over here, and I'm just going to move it down slightly. If you hold down Control and you use your arrow keys, you can move something pixel by pixel. I just want to make sure that it comes just south of that little wall edge there. I can also, at this stage, if I want to increase the width across, I could make it longer or whatever. Switching back over now on the same layer, I'm going to drop down my opacity of this quite a lot, maybe down to something like 25. No, that's too much. Let's do 100. Yeah, that should be pretty good. And I'm going to drop down my width here to be quite a bit smaller. And then I'm going to start to paint in some of these little areas in through here and allow myself to fade in some of this water. And this is all on one layer. I can up the opacity of this quite a bit, I think. Let's try 200. And let's make it a little bit narrower so I have a little bit more control. I'm going to be putting in an actual another layer on top of this, but I want to have a pretty decent little fade here. As you can see, that steps in pretty nicely. And now what I'll do is I'll actually take my effects layer and I'll drop this right on top. I'm going to jump into my effects over here first, and I'll drop this right on top of where the water is. And now what I can do is I can turn this on to my ocean. And I want my background, I can actually probably put on top of this and then just move it up. And then, yeah, what I should do is, to make this work appropriately and so that the water is only there, I'll actually probably want to be painting another layer of water on top here. But that would probably be the best way. It takes a little bit of forethought. Oh, I got some questions over here. Why are you so awesome, Josh? Ah, Rob, thanks, buddy. Will this video be in the FG YouTube channel later, or as I am an Australian and just woke up? It'll be on here on Twitch, and you can certainly watch it here. Yeah, I oftentimes, Fantasy Grounds College, go through and do several layers and create lots of different interesting effects between them with shadows and highlights and whatnot. Yes, I do a kind of a constant back and forth between a lot of things when I'm creating stuff inside of FGU. And we'll grab this guy and we'll drop him down in here and we'll put him on top of our background layer. Not below, on top, right there. And I can begin to paint in these little fades here. And what I'll do is I'll layer this on and then I'll do some waves over the top of it. I'm just going to do this really messy for right now. What I'm really just trying to do is create a little bit of a transition from my water into my land, which I've pretty well completed there. And then if I type in waves, I should get a whole bunch of different waves. And I actually have a wave brush as well. And so I can just drag and drop this guy right in here. I can make it an appropriate size. And then I can begin to paint this right over the top here. And what I like to do with something like this as well is I always like to drop down my opacity and then build it up in layers. So I could come in here and do some really subtle kind of things, make this quite a bit smaller, and maybe even do some like up through here. And create some really nice kind of transitions between the two. And it's as simple as that, guys. Yeah, doing the wave. Is that something, do people still do that? The wave? I think that that might have dated you. And me too. Okay, so let's see here. So would a good way to be blending be, would a good way for blending be to make this here, pull out a piece of graphics to import into Photoshop, touch up, and bring it back as an asset? You certainly could do it that way. Yeah, you certainly could. One of the main things that uh, you're always able to do, and you can even do it in real time too. And I've shown that in previous streams. I'm not going to pull out Photoshop today, but you can certainly go in, put an asset on your map, update it in Photoshop, and it will update in your map in real time. Yes, you could certainly. I can add another layer with a high watermark for sure. Thanks, GM. So with all of the different layer functionalities and everything else that you have, I also have a whole bunch of just like drag and drop kind of waves that you can just drag in, and you can see you can zoom in quite well and still get a pretty good look at um, all of the different aspects here. You can see how many layers I've kind of put up there. And so mixing and matching all of the different techniques of painting, dragging and dropping different elements, and the like, you can really produce a whole lot of different elements in here. Let's see, is that the one that's got that? Yeah. Oh, I got to be on the right layer here. The eraser tool is so much fun. You can give and then you can take away. Um, any other questions about this stuff? Is there anything that I have done that I didn't explain thoroughly, or is there something that you would like me to show more of, or? Oh, did they, Dan? That's funny. Sure, I can add some doors. No problem. I have a whole bunch of different doors that are included in a whole bunch of different assets, and I would do it exactly the same way. Um, let's just type in door. Let's see how many doors are going to pop up here. We got a whole bunch here. Depending on the tile set and well the art package and so on and so forth, will determine like what kind of doors I might want to use. But let's say I can either just drag and drop and make them the appropriate size. And what do we want? Make this like 1.5 wide or something. So we can either just drag and drop and place a door in, something like this. I'd probably put it down in underneath the actual wall itself. And we can also just grab these and adjust them to whatever we want to create this at. But I could also paint them in as well and do all kinds of different stuff. So let's say I didn't want to do it that way. I'm going to paint in my doors. I could just line this up and find the appropriate size here. Um, looks like we need to be like 1.5. And I would probably create its own layer just to be on the safe side. But we're going to live a little bit dangerously today. We're out of control over here. I'm going to make this slightly more narrow and not quite as tall. So here's an interesting little thing that you guys might know or not know. We can use our decimals, and even though it not shows it, we can go out more decimals than it actually shows. So if I'm here and it's at 1.4, and I want to put this door here, but I think it's too wide, and I do 1.3, and I think that that's not a lot wide enough, I can do 1.35, and it will actually update correctly, even though it only displays 1.4. Oh, I don't want to be in my line tool. I want to be in my stamp tool. And then I can just stamp in a door there. So all of the different elements are yeah, so in a crazy detailed world, you can really get into as far as you want to go. Yes, I can go into a little bit of the line of sight with you guys too, which would be great before we get going. And I'm actually going to, I can do it as I've already showed you. We can create a whole bunch of different ways that we can generate our own line of sight. I, however, tend to like to do it by myself. I like to paint out all of my walls and do it independently. It's super fast and easy. And I would do it exactly the same way as creating, I'm going to make my own line of sight individual layer here for the demonstration purposes. I usually attach them to particular elements, like a particular layer. But what I do is, what I'm going to do in this particular instance is I'm just going to uh, it works exactly as I was demonstrating before when I was painting out the walls themselves using the arrow keys and the space bar. I'm going to do it exactly the same way with this. I'm just going to click once, and then I'm going to begin to move my mouse to the appropriate place. Let's say I want to do it here. And then I'm just going to hit my space bar and go up, and I can follow all of these contours exactly. My wall's a little bit off, so I apologize for that. And I'm just going to do all of these areas here. And I've completely generated all of this information. And now that I have some of these starting points here, like I can adjust this. This isn't, maybe I'll just move this over slightly. Everything will now snap. I know that there's supposed to be a secret door over here, I think, or over here. I'm not exactly sure without looking at it. But what I'll do is I'll just gonna, we'll save from here. And then this will magnetically snap, so I can just double click that there and put in my toggleable wall. I'll do the same here. And I'm going to overlap some of these so that I can now just come back in, and I can guarantee that this is going to match up perfectly. And we can delete these. I think that there's supposed to be a secret door in here as well, and another door down here, but that's fine. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my toggleable wall. I'm going to grab my line tool again, and I'm going to do that right across there. And I'm going to go into my door here. And I'm actually going to overshoot here slightly. And I want to do that. We can zoom in really, really far and we can make this perfect. But I want to make sure that these are all connected properly. So I always overshoot slightly on everything. So here we have this entire area over here. Let me just close this down, and I'm going to grab my combat tracker. We got Bob over here. And I'm going to go back into my play zone here and turn on my line of sight. And here we have Bob. make sure he's in a square. And as he's looking around, he can only see in here. Now, me as the DM, right, we have this toggleable wall over here. And so Bob can come up to this, and I can open this for him, but he cannot. So once I open that, he can free to explore the rest of the environment. But Bob can come over, and as long as this is unlocked, he can open up his own doors. That's correct. When you move, it'll snap to an existing line, unless, of course, you're holding down Control, and it won't snap. So all of your players will be able to interact, and if I want to lock this door, let's say Bob goes into this room and I shut the door behind him, and I shift click on it, and it will lock this door. And so now Bob is unable to open that door on his own. Only the GM will be able to open it at this point. And you can see that it's quite awesome. Okay, so we do not have our line of sight is what we've been focusing on. Down the pipeline, we have talked about adding into actual distances and whatnot, but that is not in the system yet. We want to make sure that everything is perfect before we add any more layers on top of it. LOS and masking is not particularly linked. No, not that I'm aware of. Um, it's two totally completely independent systems, so that you can have further control over the dynamic interaction between the two. Yeah, so there's no specific dynamic light system, just LOS that we have implemented at the time. Yes, players cannot walk through walls. I as the GM, am able to move Bob through a wall, but the player himself cannot. A player cannot move through a wall. So when we're in our line of sight tools, we have this whole range of actual ways that we draw them. But here, down here in this next section, and this is the question. The question was, how do you distinguish between switchable wall and door, line versus rectangle? It's all in our tools section. Once we hit the line of sight tab, we have walls, we have terrain, door, and toggleable wall. Whatever we've clicked, whatever tool up here we're using will draw this particular element. Yeah, for sure. Well, you can move PC through a wall. I don't believe that there's currently any system in the that allows you to just turn off that ability. Um, Not that I'm aware of. No. Is there a difference between making a LOS barrier and an LOE barrier, invisible wall? No. If I were to, let's say, let's grab Bob and whoop, I don't want to do that. Let's grab Bob and put him over here. And if I go back into my line of sight and I go into, I just create, uh, for whatever reason, some sort of barrier there. I certainly can. I don't have to have any sort of graphical attachment to it. And then when we switch back over into the play, you won't be able to see it, but it will just be an invisible wall. Okay, so terrain is for all of those items. Let me grab something that I can kind of demonstrate with you. What would be a good element in here? So terrain elements are all of those things that you want to see all of can interact with slightly differently, yet it interferes with your line of sight, but not necessarily your movement. So it might be like a bush, right? So let's say I'll just grab a bush, let's say. Let's say we have this, for some reason, there's a nice snowy bush in here. Increase its size here a bit. So here we have this nice snowy bush in here, and it's a little bit larger than it should be. This is actually from the town map pack, so it should be quite small. But for demonstration purposes, we'll jump into our line of sight here, and we'll use our terrain. And I'm just going to grab a circle to do it really quickly here and kind of just drag this out. And then I'm going to move it here, kind of fit. So the way that this works is that Bob can see the entire bush, and I'll switch over so you can kind of see this, right? So Bob can see the entire bush. He can't see what's behind the bush unless he gets inside of the bush, and then he can see out normally. Let's make this quite a bit bigger so it's a better example of kind of what's going on here. So I'm going to grab this and pull this out a little bit. Again, this should be, and I'm going to tuck this in slightly so it's more accurate. It's good to go fast, but it's also good to take some time and do the proper adjustments. And now we can switch back over. Okay, so Bob is over here. He cannot see through this bush, right? He can see the bush in its entirety, but not through it. And the player can climb inside of this bush, and then he's able to see everywhere around him. That's kind of how terrain is used. A lot of times I'll use terrain for elevation elements, so like a hill. And when you're on top of the hill, you can obviously see from the other side, all around. But if you're on one side of the hill, you can't see the other side of the hill. Let's see if we got some questions in here. We have, do circles always drag out from the side, or can you hit a modifier key to drag them from the center? Oh, that's a great question. I do not believe that we can drag them from the center currently. I believe they always drag from the side. But as again, you can hold down Shift and make sure that it maintains a perfect circle. Can Bob see from the outside whether a goblin is already in the bush? Well, there's a whole separate system between, we have line of sight, right? Line of sight definitely works for, let me grab the goblin. Goblin's a bad guy. When he's on this side, you can see that if I have this guy selected, you can see he carries out, which means that he is not able to be seen by Bob, even though he knows that he's there, right? If the goblin is inside the bush, he can be seen by Bob currently, but I also have control over that in the combat tracker. I can just turn that off, which makes it so that when Bob is around here, he might not know that the goblin is in there, and I just have to turn this back on. However, line of sight does work for anything else. So if the goblin goes behind the corner, even if a small amount of it sticks out, Bob's still not going to be able to see that goblin. I can show terrain with some stairs and whatnot. I think I might have some pre-generated maps maybe that we could set up. Let me close this map down, and I'm just going to jump over into my library, my assets. And let's see here. I think that if I go into let's do an interior map here. Here's some maps that I made a while back. And I'll grab one of these elements. We have some nice stairs in here. Yeah, let's grab this one. So this is on a second floor, right? We have our two sets of stairs, one going up and one coming up from the bottom. And we have, this doesn't have any line of sight already set into it. It's just a pretty basic kind of map. And so if we were going to be setting up the stairs here, I'm going to go over to my line of sight. I'm going to go into my terrain and I'm going to grab my line tool. And what I can do is I can begin to populate this. Well, let me think how I want to do this. Let's just try it this way. Might take me a little bit of experimenting to get it to work properly. And let me grab my my buddies over here. And so the way that this would work is, as you can see, that Bob can see all of these elements in here, right? He can see the entirety of the stairs and in either direction, but he cannot see through them. Like the back sides of the stairs are completely obscured. Even when he moves up into this staircase, he's not going to be able to see in the direction that he wants to go in. This is probably not the best example. I should probably find one that's got a straight staircase that will work. But yes, that's a great element, great area for it to be used in. So the question is, if I have a map that I had doctored up in FG Classic and then pulled it into Unity, would I have to add all of the LOS manually, or would it recognize the walls and such without intervention? I guess it would depend on what was the where was the original creation. Yeah, I would assume Dave is correct. You'd probably have to put it in manually, but it's a pretty easy task to add in all of your line of sight. Uh, a quick way to add in your line of sight as well, if you are in a rush. So like this one has no line of sight. Let me actually switch this back over, and I'm just going to grab these and delete them. So you can make a painting layer. Let's make a new painting layer here. And if I were to paint out, even with any one of these, I'm going to make this one. No, let's make it 0.5. So I can paint out all of these different areas, right? And I can just drag this right around. Double click there. Oh, whoops, I didn't want to do that. Control Z is your friend. Double click there, and we can paint out all of these different areas really fast. And then I can just jump right over to here, my line of sight, and I can populate all of that with instant line of sight. And then I can delete this painting layer. And to quickly generate line of sight, if you want to do it that way, you can certainly do it that way as well. A lot of what you buy from the store will have all of the line of sight added into it. It'll say actually on the store page when you go to purchase it. If I forgot a wall, can I create a painting layer, add more lines, and send that to LOS without destroying the previous information? You can. And you can have multiple layers of walls. You can have multiple layers of LOS. You can really get very complex in the way that you set things up. Yeah, exactly. And I think that that's one of the main um, things that we focused on in our creation of FGU was to make sure that everything was backward compatible with FGC. So you can bring in over all of your stuff from Classic and it will function. Do you guys have any more questions, or is there anything else? I'm going to be starting to wind this thing up and wind it up. I guess it's wind it down. I'm not going to be winding it up. I'm going to be winding it down now, and then we're going to be. Yeah, it would be great to be in person next year, GM. Great, Coves. Yeah, I think that once you guys get into it and you start to play around with all of the features and what you can do inside of the system, I don't think that there is another virtual tabletop out there that can compare with the advanced image creation tools. I know, right? I haven't been, I should be having something to wind myself back up again. Well, if there's no further questions or anything else that you guys would like to see an example or for me to explain, I'm going to be calling it for the day. Again, I want to say, oh, we have a question. If you created a brand new element asset, such as a rock or a tree, how could we add LOS to that asset so that we could drag it into and onto any future map? There's actually a tool that you can get. I think it's on the forums. I'm not exactly sure, but it'll extract the LOS information in an XML format, and then you can just include it in with your image files. And every time you drag it out, it'll immediately populate it with that LOS. Great. Well, thank you guys so much again, and I hope you've had a great time. I will be here back again this following Saturday. So if you guys ever want to stop in, I will always be here on Saturday from 3 to 6, doing all of this stuff and showcasing a lot more things and new features as they come available. So thank you guys so much, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your Gen Con and week, and hopefully you have some great games. Also, Doug will be doing another presentation tomorrow for character creation and campaign management. So if you're around, check that out. Awesome. Well, great guys. I am so glad that you came in and were involved in this. It's been a wonderful time. I've had a great time as well. And also, if you guys ever have any questions whatsoever, make sure that you stop in any Saturday, and I will do my best to explain anything to you. Even if you want to know how to make um, your own particular assets, if you're having struggle doing that, I'm more than happy to help you guys in any way that I can.